attending university at Harvard. Will you see this information there?
No, no. This sort of information, again, is too compartmentalized. People who are writing about American history typically don't read Arabic.
Yeah.
The person who did the pioneering work on Muslims in America before Columbus was Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick, who is fluent in Arabic and who has a PhD in history, by the way.
So he went and looked at this authentic information, and this was documented, and now anybody who is a sincere historian now, he can take from this work that he's done?
Yeah, it's beginning to receive some notice.
Okay, so let's go back to what we said. Why is this so important to say for the Muslim youth to know this history?
Crucial for the Muslim youth to know this history.
Or not even just the Muslim youth, for Americans in general.
Well, crucial for them to realize that Muslims have been here all along and that Muslims have made contributions to America all along. But especially for the second generation of Muslims in America, this is a most important piece of information, because as they hit adolescence, they're struggling to develop their own sense of identity, establishing their national cultural identity as Americans and establishing their religious identity as Muslims. And when you meet or are confronted by this sort of bias that says, well, if you're a Muslim, you obviously can't be an American, that creates conflict for them. That creates identity conflict for them. So it's important that they have this grounding and understanding their own unique heritage in America, that Muslims centuries before them were contributing to America.
Tell us some more interesting things that we probably didn't hear before about some of the other contributions that Muslims have made to America.
Well, as I mentioned, Muslims were here with Columbus in his epic voyage in 1492. Amongst them, we can point to at least one Muslim who was Pedro Alonso Nino. He was a Muslim from Africa, sailed with Columbus, and helped charter and navigate much of the Atlantic Ocean. But three very important people we need to point out are the Pinzon brothers. And the Pinzon brothers were Moriscos. Now that's a term that needs some definition. Most people probably are not familiar with that term. In 1492, the Spanish Inquisition was going on full blast. And the Spanish Inquisition targeted both Jews and Muslims for their persecution.
Let's stop for there and digress. What was this about, this Spanish Inquisition, just in short?
Ferdinand and Isabella, their Catholic majesties of Spain, had reconquered Spain from the Muslims with the fall of Granada in 1492. And they had received a special bull, that's the technical term, from the Pope to launch the Spanish Inquisition, to force people to convert to Christianity, both Jews and Muslims. A lot of torture went on. A lot of people were killed in the process of doing this, both Jews and Muslims. At that time, the Muslims in Andalusia, or Spain, received a religious verdict from scholars in North Africa that said, look, if your life is threatened, go ahead and undergo a sham conversion to Christianity. And on the outward side, appear to be Christian, just continue to practice your Islam in private.
This is if you're at the sword, at your neck, and
if your life is threatened. So a number of Muslims did this. And these Muslims who did this and their descendants were known as Moriscos. So we had the three Pinzon brothers with Columbus. They're Moriscos. Now the three brothers had very important positions in Columbus's expedition. Martin Pinzon was the captain of the Pinta, one of the three ships. His brother Vicente was captain of the Nina, the second of the three ships. And Francisco was the pilot of the Pinta. So three key positions in Columbus's staff were held by Moriscos, people who had either undergone a sham conversion or were the descendants of people who had undergone the sham conversion to Christianity but continued to maintain their Islam in private. In addition, one sailor that sailed with Columbus in 1492, Rodrigo de Triana, who was a Christian when he made the voyage, as soon as he got back to Spain, he actually converted to Islam, which took a tremendous amount of courage because the Spanish Inquisition, like I say, was going full tilt in persecuting Muslims and Jews. So these are the people we know of that sailed with Columbus and helped Columbus, quote unquote, discover America.
Please keep going. We're really intrigued by this information.
Well, and after Columbus, we had Muslims coming with the Spanish conquistadors, because again, that Spanish Inquisition was still going on. And many, many Muslims volunteered to go to the New World as a way of escaping the Spanish Inquisition. So, for example, we have Muslims in almost every one of the Spanish expeditions to the New World by the conquistadors. Nuflo de Olano was a Muslim who accompanied Balboa in his expedition of the Americas. But probably the most famous of these Muslims with the Spanish conquistadors was Estevanica of Azamor. That's how you'll find his name written in the history books. And he is famous. Spanish language films have been made about Estevanico of Azamor.
He was a Muslim.
He was a Muslim. His real name was Mustafa Zamori. Estevanico of Azamor was his slave name. He had been captured in Morocco and enslaved. And in the year 1527, he sailed with his owner from Spain to the Caribbean and landed in Hispaniola. And there he and his owner joined the de Narvaez expedition that sailed from Hispaniola in the Caribbean to Florida. And this expedition consisted of 5 ships and about 500 to 600 men. Well, along route, they were hit by a hurricane. Some of the ships sank. The survivors, when they made it to Florida, were immediately attacked by Indians, many of them perishing. Those survivors, including Mustafa, began a 5,000-mile westward and then southern trek on foot from Florida to Mexico City. And they were the first people from the old world to go through, you know, Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and then down into Texas and finally down into Mexico and to Mexico City. And when they finally arrived there, there was only Mustafa and 3 others still left alive out of those 500 to 600 who had begun that expedition. History books talk about him, but they'll talk about him as Estevanico of Azamor. They won't mention that his real name was Mustafa Zamori, and they won't mention the fact that he was a Muslim.
Yeah. What about Kunta Kinte?
Well, this is later.
Yeah.
He obviously wasn't there with the conquistadors. But before we get to the conquistadors, or get to Kunta Kinte, you know, Muslims were here with the early colonies. The Spanish established a colony early on at Santa Elena back in the year 1566. And many of the colonists that they took were from the Galician mountain areas of Spain and Portugal, which was an area that was very, very densely populated by Muslims. So it's a very safe assumption. We had a number of Muslims in the Santa Elena colony, which was located in the southeastern, what is now the United States. We also know that Spain settled Turkish Muslims, both in Cuba and Mexico and in the southwestern United States. These were primarily Turkish Muslims who were silk and textile workers. And in Jamestown Colony that the British established, again we had Turkish Muslims who were brought into the colony, again primarily silk and textile workers. And in fact they became so numerous in Jamestown Colony that Virginia actually passed a law prohibiting any more Turks and Muslims from entering the Jamestown Colony. And the first written record we have of those Muslims being there is from the year 1631. So again, very substantial contributions. You mentioned Kunta Kinte.
Yes.
Very famous in Alex Haley's book, Roots.
Yeah, they actually have a new revised DVD or movie that one can see, and I watched it. It was really good.
And the miniseries that was
miniseries,
broadcast years ago really doesn't mention the fact that he was a Muslim. If you are a Muslim and you know what to look for, you can deduce it. But the book makes very, very clear that Kunta Kinte was a Muslim. In the Americas, both North and South America, during this unforgivable period of human slavery. There were approximately 20 million enslaved Africans that were brought to the Americas. Of these, current historians are now estimating between 20 and 30% were Muslims. So between 4 and 6 million enslaved African Muslims were brought to the Americas. Many of them highly educated, some with the equivalent of PhD degrees from the University of Timbuktu. And historians are now finding in little county museums in the American South entire books written in Arabic by these enslaved African Muslims.
Wow.
The entire Quran written from memory in Arabic. Entire books of Islamic jurisprudence written from memory in Arabic. So a very educated group of people, and some modern historians are now positing that the percentage of literacy among the enslaved Africans in the American South was actually higher than the percentage of literacy among the slave owners. It's just that the slaves' literacy was in Arabic, not in English.
Yeah.
So who were some of these Muslim slaves? One was Kunta Kinte.
Yes.
And Kunta Kinte grew up in, he was born around 1750 in Darfur in West Africa in what is now Gambia. When he was a teenager, he went out to into the jungle to get some wood to make a drum. And at that point he was captured and enslaved, taken to the coast and put on board a ship, the Lord Ligonier, and transported to the Americas. And how horrible these conditions were on the ship. These people were chained in a reclining position where they were lying down, body next to body, and kept in this position throughout almost the entire voyage.
How long would a voyage take?
Oh, it could take a couple of months.
Wow.
And they were given, you know, a bare minimum of food and water. The conditions, sanitary conditions, as you can imagine, were horrible. There were no bathroom breaks. You know, you just stayed in that position. How bad was it? Well, on the ship that Kunta Kinte came over on, we're told that approximately 30% of those enslaved Africans died during the voyage to the Americas. Well, Kunta Kinte reached the Americas and was sold at auction to John Waller of Spotsylvania County. And Kunta Kinte could not adjust to being a slave. And so he repeatedly tried to escape. And finally, to prevent him from escaping anymore, Waller had one of his feet amputated. And at that point then he was sold to Waller's brother, who was a somewhat more compassionate slave owner. He later married a father to daughter named Kizzy, who was sold away from the family to another owner. That owner raped Kizzy, producing a son called Chicken George. And there's a photograph of Chicken George taken late in his life as an old man that shows him sitting down, and he's wearing the kufi, the skull cap associated with the Muslim, and the thobe, or long gown associated with Muslim men. So we know Kunta Kinte was able to pass along at least some of his Islam to his daughter, and she in turn some of it to her son. So Kunta Kinte, probably the most famous of the enslaved African Muslims in America. Though in my book, Muslims in American History, I give the biographies, I think of about 30 of these enslaved